On a seemingly ordinary Valentine's night, a romantic dinner turned into a harrowing tragedy that would forever alter the lives of those involved. Naomi Green, a dedicated police officer in Florida, returned home with high hopes of rekindling the warmth of her marriage. Little did she know that the evening would culminate in a shocking betrayal that would lead her to commit an unthinkable act, one that would leave a permanent scar on her family and ignite a firestorm of media attention. As she stepped through her front door, Naomi expected to find her husband, Marcellus, waiting for her, ready to enjoy a quiet evening together. Instead, she stumbled upon a scene that no mother or wife should ever have to witness: her husband in bed with their 14-year-old son, Jalen. Consumed by rage and disbelief, Naomi's life spiraled into chaos in an instant. In a moment of emotional upheaval, she fired 15 shots at Marcellus, a desperate act that would forever define her existence. Naomi was not just a police officer, she was a protector, a provider, and, above all, a loving mother. Her life had been built on the foundations of trust and hard work, but the layers of that trust began to crumble in the weeks leading up to that fateful night. Signs of trouble had emerged, subtle yet unmistakable. Jalen, once a bright and expressive child, had grown distant and withdrawn. Marcellus, charismatic and successful, had become increasingly secretive, leaving Naomi to grapple with the nagging feeling that something was profoundly wrong within her family. As the story unfolds, we delve into the psyche of a woman torn between her roles as a law enforcement officer and a mother. The questions arise: what drives a person to the brink? Was Naomi's act a desperate attempt to protect her son, or was it something far darker? The nuances of human emotion and the complexities of family dynamics take center stage as we explore this tragic tale. We invite you to join us as we unravel the chilling details of this case, examining the lives forever changed by a single night of violence. What would you have done in Naomi's shoes? As we navigate through this heart-wrenching story, we encourage you to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Did justice prevail? What are your opinions on the choices made by those involved? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. Your engagement helps us bring more stories to light, and we appreciate your support. Naomi Green arrived home on Valentine's Day, her heart filled with anticipation. She had planned an intimate evening, hoping to rekindle the spark in her marriage. The day had been a whirlwind of activity, but her mind was focused on the surprise dinner she had prepared for her husband, Marcellus. She imagined the two of them sharing laughter and love, reminiscing about their early days together. Little did she know, the evening would take a nightmarish turn that would shatter her world. As she stepped through the front door just after 9 p.m., Naomi was greeted by an unsettling silence that hung thick in the air. The house, usually filled with the sounds of Jalen, their 14-year-old son, bustling about, was eerily quiet. The living room was exactly as she had left it that morning, neat and undisturbed. There were no signs of a celebration, no music playing, and no laughter echoing. A sense of foreboding washed over her as she called out for her husband and son, but only silence responded. Naomi's instincts, honed through nearly a decade of police work, kicked in. Something was off. She made her way upstairs, her pulse quickening with each step, drawn by faint whispers that floated through the air. The sound was so incongruous with the silence that had enveloped the house, it sent a chill down her spine. As she approached the bedroom door, her heart raced, and she hesitated, fingers hovering over the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open, and in that moment, time seemed to freeze. The sight before her was a scene from a nightmare. Marcellus lay in bed, his shirt unbuttoned, and beside him was Jalen, curled up against the headboard, tears streaming down his face. The boy's expression was one of pure fear, his body trembling as he clutched the sheets tightly. Naomi's mind raced as she struggled to process the betrayal unfolding before her eyes. Her husband, the man she had trusted and loved, was in a compromising position with their son. Shock coursed through her veins, paralyzing her momentarily. Marcellus, sensing her presence, quickly fumbled to compose himself, his eyes wide with panic as they locked onto hers. "Baby, I don't." He stammered, his voice trailing off as he realized the gravity of the situation. Jalen's eyes, filled with a pleading silence, met hers, and in that instant, a sickening realization crashed over Naomi. This wasn't an isolated incident. The horrors of betrayal had been creeping into their lives for far too long. The air in the room grew thick with tension, and a deep guttural scream erupted from Naomi's throat, shattering the suffocating silence. The reality of what she had walked in on felt unbearable. Marcellus stepped toward her, hands raised, as if he could somehow talk his way out of the chaos he had created. "Naomi, listen to me," he urged, but all she could feel was the raw fury boiling within her. In that moment, Naomi was no longer a police officer trained to handle crises, she was a mother faced with an unimaginable betrayal. Her instincts screamed at her to protect her son, to take control of the situation. She reached for her service weapon, her fingers wrapping around the familiar grip, and with a voice shaky with emotion, she declared, "I'm calling 911. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Jalen flinched at the sound, his whole body jerking as if struck. Marcellus took another step forward, attempting to defuse the situation with smooth words. "Put the gun down, Naomi. This isn't what you think. Let's talk about this." But Naomi's resolve hardened. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her again, she had witnessed the truth. In a split second, everything escalated. Marcellus lunged, trying to grab her wrist and take the gun from her. But Naomi, fueled by a primal rage, pulled the trigger. The first shot hit him squarely in the chest, and his eyes widened in disbelief as he stumbled backward. The chaos of the moment unfolded in a blur. She fired again and again, each shot fueled by betrayal and anguish. As the final shot rang out, silence enveloped the room. Marcellus's body slumped to the floor, blood pooling on the white carpet. Naomi stood there, trembling, the weight of her actions crashing down upon her. She turned to Jalen, who was still frozen against the headboard, his face pale and his breath shallow. The reality of what she had done sank in as sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. In that moment, Naomi's world shattered. She had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the consequences of that fateful night would reverberate through the lives of everyone involved. Naomi Green's life had always been one of dedication and commitment, both to her career and her family. A decorated police officer with nearly a decade of service in Miami, she had earned a reputation for her sharp instincts and unwavering resolve. To the community, she was a symbol of protection and justice, a woman who faced danger head-on and comforted victims in their darkest hours. Yet, beneath this strong exterior lay the complexities of her personal life, intricately woven with love, ambition, and the harsh realities of betrayal. Naomi had married Marcellus Green when they were both young, eager to build a life filled with dreams and aspirations. Marcellus had swept her off her feet, a charming man with an ambitious spirit who promised her stability and a bright future. He was a natural at networking, quickly making a name for himself in Miami's competitive real estate market. His charisma drew people in, turning casual conversations into lucrative business deals. The couple enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle filled with luxury vacations in a beautiful home in an upscale neighborhood, all of which seemed like the perfect picture of success. Together, they welcomed their son, Jalen, who quickly became the center of their world. Jalen was not your typical teenager. He was bright, introspective, and had a passion for art and film. While other kids his age gravitated towards sports and video games, Jalen found solace in sketching scenes from his imagination and editing short videos on his computer. His dreams of becoming a filmmaker were nurtured in a home that valued creativity and artistic expression. Naomi reveled in her role as both a protector and a nurturer, balancing the demands of her job with the joys of motherhood. However, over the months leading up to that fateful Valentine's Day, Naomi began to notice subtle changes that worried her. The once vibrant atmosphere of their home became suffused with an unsettling silence. Jalen, who had once filled the house with stories of his latest projects, became increasingly withdrawn. Conversations that used to flow easily turned into brief exchanges, his eyes often cast down as if he were hiding something deep within. Naomi's heart ached as she tried to reach out to him, but each attempt was met with a wall of silence. Marcellus, too, began to exhibit behaviors that raised red flags. The lively, engaging man she had married morphed into someone distant and secretive. He would often take calls that he quickly dismissed whenever Naomi entered the room, his phone buzzing incessantly with messages he wouldn't share. The once open and trusting relationship they had built seemed to crumble before her eyes, replaced by an atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. Despite these signs, Naomi found herself struggling to confront the reality of her situation. She had always been the type to trust her instincts, yet as a mother, she wanted to believe that the family she had built was intact. She had never been a jealous or suspicious wife. Her marriage was built on trust, a foundation that now felt precarious. As a police officer, she had faced countless threats and dangers, but the thought that the real danger could be lurking within her own home was one she could hardly bear. The night before Valentine's Day, Naomi had a restless sleep, her mind swirling with concerns about Jalen and Marcellus. She tried to dismiss her worries, convincing herself that it was just the stress of balancing work and family life. Yet, deep down, a nagging feeling persisted, an instinct telling her that something was profoundly wrong. As she prepared for the evening, she hoped that a romantic dinner would help mend the growing rift, bringing back the warmth that had once characterized their relationship. The idealized image of their family life, once a source of pride, started to feel like a facade. Naomi had dedicated herself to creating a loving home, one filled with laughter and dreams, but as she stood on the precipice of that disastrous night, she had no idea how rapidly everything would unravel. The love she had for her husband and son would soon be tested in the most unimaginable way, and the choices she was forced to make would forever alter the course of their lives. As the weeks passed leading up to Valentine's Day, Naomi Green found herself increasingly uneasy, sensing an undercurrent of tension that seemed to permeate her home. The vibrant laughter and lively conversations that once filled their house had faded into an unsettling silence. The joy that had characterized her family life felt like a distant memory, replaced by a pervasive anxiety that gnawed at her insides. Jalen, her once energetic son, had become a shadow of his former self. The bright spark in his eyes dimmed, and his enthusiasm for art and film waned. Naomi noticed him spending long hours alone in his room, earbuds in, seemingly lost in a world that was closed off from her. Where he once eagerly shared his creative endeavors, he now retreated behind walls of silence. This change concerned her deeply. She could sense that something was troubling him, but every attempt to engage him was met with reluctance or outright dismissal. At first, Naomi attributed Jalen's behavior to the typical challenges of adolescence. She remembered her own teenage years, filled with angst and the desire for independence. But this felt different. There was a heaviness to his demeanor that made her blood run cold. She began to notice the subtle signs, the way he flinched when she entered his room, the hastily closed laptop when she walked by, the slight tremor in his voice when he responded to her questions. Each small detail began to weave a tapestry of worry in her mind, and she felt an urgent need to protect him from whatever turmoil he was facing. Meanwhile, Marcellus had also changed, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic. The man who had once been her rock now seemed distant, lost in a whirlwind of secrets. He spent late nights at work, often returning home just before dawn, his clothes disheveled and his eyes weary. Naomi tried to rationalize his absence, convincing herself that he was simply caught up in the demands of his real estate business. But as the late nights turned into weeks, her intuition screamed that there was more to the story. Naomi found herself grappling with feelings of jealousy and insecurity, emotions she had never allowed herself to entertain in their marriage. She began to notice the little things: Marcellus's phone buzzing incessantly at odd hours, messages he dismissed with a casual wave, and the way he would flinch at her questions. When she asked about his late nights, he would brush her off with a vague excuse, his eyes darting away as if he were hiding something. She felt a growing sense of isolation, trapped in a cycle of doubt and fear. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the household grew thicker. Naomi often found herself standing at the threshold of Jalen's room, wanting to knock, wanting to connect, but held back by an invisible barrier. The distance between them felt insurmountable, and she feared that her attempts to reach out would only push him further away. The last thing she wanted was to drive a wedge between them, but each day felt like a step further into a chasm of misunderstanding. The emotional turmoil escalated when Naomi stumbled upon a series of text messages on Marcellus's phone one evening. Curiosity had gotten the best of her. He had left his phone unattended, and she felt an overwhelming urge to understand the man she had married. What she discovered sent her heart plummeting. The messages were flirty and suggestive, exchanged with a name she didn't recognize. The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning, igniting a firestorm of emotions: betrayal, anger, and heartbreak. Confronting Marcellus about the messages was a difficult decision, one she dreaded but knew was necessary. That night, with her heart racing and emotions swirling, she finally mustered the courage to ask him directly. His reaction was defensive. He dismissed her concerns as paranoia, insisting that she was misinterpreting the context. But Naomi could see the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the way he shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. The conversation spiraled into an argument, and she felt her sense of reality crumble as he accused her of being controlling and mistrustful. The weight of these revelations left Naomi feeling trapped in a nightmare. The very fabric of her family was unraveling before her eyes, and the fear of losing both her husband and her son loomed larger than ever. The signs were all there, but she had been unwilling to acknowledge them fully, hoping against hope that the love they once shared could weather the storm. As she lay awake at night, consumed by worry and doubt, she realized that her family was teetering on the brink. The struggle to hold everything together was draining her, and the question of how to navigate the impending disaster loomed ominously in her mind. The love that had once been a fortress now felt like a fragile facade, and the truth was closing in, threatening to shatter everything she held dear. In the days leading up to Valentine's Day, the tension within the Green household became unbearable. Naomi felt as though she were walking on eggshells, each step taken with trepidation. The whispers of betrayal and the shadows of doubt loomed large, clouding every interaction. Her instincts, honed from years of police work, screamed that something was profoundly wrong, yet she struggled to confront the reality that was slowly unraveling before her eyes. Naomi's heart ached as she watched Jalen retreat further into himself. The boy who once filled their home with laughter and creativity now barely spoke, his passion for art and filmmaking seemingly extinguished. Instead of sharing his latest projects, he spent hours locked away in his room, the door shut tight as if it were a fortress against the world. Each time she knocked, asking if he wanted to talk, he would respond with a simple, "I'm fine," but the emptiness in his voice told a different story. The distance between them felt insurmountable, and the walls of silence grew thicker. As the evening of Valentine's Day approached, Naomi's anxiety reached a fever pitch. She had hoped that the romantic dinner she had planned would help mend the rift in her family, a chance to reconnect with both her husband and son. Yet, as she prepared the meal, she couldn't shake the feeling that the evening would only serve to expose the cracks that had formed in their lives. The intimate setting felt more like a facade, a desperate attempt to mask the turmoil that lay beneath the surface. That night, Naomi's heart raced as she set the table, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the walls. She could hear Marcellus moving about the house, but he seemed distant, as if he were physically present yet emotionally miles away. When he finally joined her at the table, she noticed the way he avoided her gaze, his fingers fidgeting with the napkin as if it were a lifeline. Despite her best efforts to engage him in light conversation, the atmosphere felt strained, charged with an unspoken tension that neither of them could articulate. As they sat down to eat, Jalen remained upstairs, his absence palpable. The empty chair at the table served as a stark reminder of the family dynamic that had shifted so dramatically. Naomi's heart sank at the thought of her son alone in his room, likely drowning in his thoughts while the rest of the world continued around him. After a few awkward exchanges, Naomi stood up, resolved to bring Jalen down and include him in their dinner. She needed to bridge the gap that had formed, to pull her family back together before it was too late. When she reached Jalen's door, she hesitated. Would he even want to join them? Gathering her courage, she knocked gently. "Jalen, sweetheart, dinner is ready. Can you come down?" Silence followed, and her heart raced with worry. After a few moments, she opened the door, only to find him sitting on the floor, surrounded by sketches and crumpled papers. His face was etched with frustration, and for a moment, she felt a wave of guilt wash over her. Had she ignored his pain for too long? "Mom, I'm not hungry," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The defeated look on his face was enough to pierce through her heart. "I just want to be alone." Naomi knelt beside him, trying to bridge the emotional distance that had grown between them. "Jalen, please. We need you at the table. It's Valentine's Day. We should be together as a family." But as she looked into his eyes, she saw a flicker of something deeper, a mixture of fear and confusion that left her feeling helpless. She reached out to touch his shoulder, but he recoiled slightly, a gesture that sent a jolt of pain through her. "I can't, Mom. I just can't." Feeling defeated, Naomi returned to the dining room, her heart heavy with the realization that the evening she had envisioned was slipping away. Marcellus tried to engage her in conversation, but she could hardly focus on his words. All she could think about was the chasm that had opened between her and her son, and the darker truths that awaited her. As the evening wore on, the tension in the air grew thicker. Naomi's mind raced with questions. What was happening within her family? What secrets were being kept? She felt the weight of an impending storm, the kind that could tear apart the very fabric of their lives. Later that night, after the dinner plates had been cleared and the candles extinguished, Naomi found herself unable to sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind swirling with thoughts of Jalen and Marcellus. The haunting feeling of betrayal lingered, gnawing at her insides. She needed answers, and with a sudden surge of resolve, she reached for Marcellus's phone, which lay charging on the kitchen counter. As she scrolled through the messages, her heart raced. The texts were flirtatious, laden with innuendos, exchanged with a name she didn't recognize. Each word felt like a dagger to her heart, slicing through the remnants of trust she had held onto. A sense of dread washed over her as the pieces began to fall into place. This was not just a fleeting moment of weakness, it was a pattern, a betrayal that had been festering beneath the surface for far too long. In that moment of clarity, Naomi understood that the truth was finally unraveling. The facade of their family life was crumbling, and she was left standing on the precipice of a reality she had feared to confront. The love she had for her husband and son was now tangled in a web of lies, and the choices she faced would reshape their lives forever. The atmosphere in the Green household had become suffocating, a palpable tension that seemed to thicken the air with every passing day. Naomi felt like a ghost haunting her own home, drifting through rooms filled with memories that now felt tainted by betrayal. As Valentine's Day approached, the emotional strain became unbearable. She was caught in a cycle of confusion, heartbreak, and rage, emotions that were too complex to articulate but too intense to ignore. That fateful evening arrived with an unsettling mix of anticipation and dread. Naomi had clung to the hope that a romantic dinner would restore some semblance of normalcy to their fractured family dynamic. She prepared the meal with care, hoping to create an atmosphere rich with warmth and love. But as she set the table, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this night would not end as she had envisioned. When Marcellus walked through the door, the weight of his presence felt different. He greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a facade that only deepened her unease. They shared an awkward exchange, both of them dancing around the unspoken truths that had come to define their lives. The absence of Jalen at the table was a reminder of the rift that had formed, a chasm that seemed insurmountable. Despite her efforts to engage Marcellus in light conversation, he remained distracted, his gaze flickering toward his phone, which buzzed incessantly with incoming messages. Each vibration sent a jolt of anxiety through Naomi. The very device that had become a source of her suspicion now felt like a ticking time bomb, the secrets it held threatening to explode at any moment. After what felt like an eternity, Naomi could bear it no longer. She rose from the table, her heart pounding, and made her way back to Jalen's room. "Jalen, please come down," she called softly, her voice tinged with desperation. "We need you here. It's important." Silence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Naomi's heart sank as she turned the doorknob, stepping into the dimly lit room. Jalen sat on the floor, surrounded by sketches, his face a mask of frustration and despair. The moment she entered, he looked up, his expression morphing from surprise to anger. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice sharp and defensive. "I want to talk to you," Naomi replied, kneeling beside him. "I'm worried about you. I can see you're not okay, and I want to help." Jalen's eyes flashed with a mix of hurt and anger. "You don't understand anything. Just leave me alone." His words cut deep, and Naomi felt the sting of his rejection. She wanted to shake him, to make him see how much she cared, but all she could do was watch as he pushed her away. Feeling defeated, she returned to the dining room, where Marcellus was still seated, his attention consumed by his phone. The sight made her blood boil, and she felt the familiar rush of anger bubbling to the surface. "Can you put that down for a second?" she demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. Marcellus looked up, surprise etched on his face. "What's wrong with you?" he replied, irritation creeping into his tone. "I'm just checking on something for work." "Work? Is that all this is to you?" Naomi shot back, unable to contain her frustration. "Do you even care about us anymore?" The tension escalated, words flying like daggers. Marcellus defended himself, his voice rising, but Naomi could hardly hear him over the pounding of her heart. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the suffocating weight of betrayal pressed heavily on her chest. In that moment, she felt a primal urge to protect her son, to shield him from the man who had become a stranger. Suddenly, a surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. Naomi's instincts kicked in, and she felt a desperate need to take control of the situation. In a moment of clarity, she reached for her service weapon, a gesture that surprised even herself. The gun felt cold and foreign in her hands, but it also brought a sense of power, a way to reclaim her agency in a world that felt chaotic and out of control. "What are you doing?" Marcellus's voice cracked, fear creeping into his tone. The tension in the room shifted, and Naomi could see the realization dawn on him. "I'm protecting my son," she declared, her voice steady despite the storm raging within her. "You've betrayed us, and I won't let you hurt him again." The atmosphere was electric, charged with the weight of unspoken emotions. Marcellus took a step back, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. "Naomi, put the gun down. This isn't the answer." But in that moment, everything around her blurred. The pain, the betrayal, and the desperate need to protect her son eclipsed all rational thought. She could see Jalen's face in her mind, the fear and confusion etched into his features. The image fueled her resolve. She felt cornered, as if the walls were closing in, and all she could think about was the need to end the cycle of betrayal. In a swift motion, she fired the weapon. The sound echoed through the house, a deafening roar that shattered the silence. Time seemed to freeze as the reality of her actions came crashing down. The chaos that followed felt surreal. Marcellus staggered back, shock written on his face, before collapsing to the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, and Naomi's heart raced as she realized the gravity of what she had just done. In that instant, she felt a whirlwind of emotions, rage, fear, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The reality of her actions settled in, and as she looked down at Marcellus, she understood that everything had changed forever. The desperate act she had committed in a moment of panic would reverberate through their lives, leaving scars that would never fully heal. Naomi was now a woman trapped in a nightmare of her own making, a mother who had crossed an unthinkable line in the name of love and protection. The moments following Naomi's desperate act were a chaotic blur, a cacophony of sirens and shouts that filled the air as the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. The weight of her actions pressed heavily on her chest, each breath feeling like an insurmountable effort. As the sound of approaching law enforcement grew louder, her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more frantic than the last. What had she done? How could it have come to this? When the police arrived, they were met with a scene of horror. Naomi stood frozen in the dim light of her home, the gun still clutched in her hand, her husband lying motionless on the floor. Officers rushed in, their training kicking in as they assessed the situation. Commands were shouted, and in a matter of moments, Naomi found herself disarmed, her hands cuffed behind her back. The disconnection between her thoughts and the reality unfolding around her was jarring. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one officer said, his voice firm yet not unkind. His partner began to secure the scene, calling for medical assistance as they assessed Marcellus's condition. The panic that surged through Naomi was overwhelming. She was a police officer, trained to respond to crises, Yet now she was the one in handcuffs, a suspect in a case that felt surreal. As she was led outside, the cold night air hit her like a slap in the face, jolting her from the fog of shock. Flashing lights illuminated the street, and she could hear the murmurs of neighbors gathering to witness the spectacle. The shame washed over her, a hot wave that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. She had lost control, and now the world would know the truth of her actions. In the days that followed, Naomi's life unraveled in ways she could never have anticipated. The media descended on her small town, eager to sensationalize the story of the police officer who shot her husband. Headlines screamed of betrayal and violence, framing her as both a victim and a perpetrator. The narrative twisted and turned, and soon, Naomi found herself at the center of a storm, her family's tragedy laid bare for all to see. As she awaited her arraignment, Naomi felt the weight of the legal consequences bearing down on her. She was charged with second-degree murder, a serious offense that could carry a lengthy prison sentence. The legal system, which she had once navigated with confidence as an officer, now felt alien and terrifying. Each moment spent in jail was a reminder of the life she had shattered and the family she was on the verge of losing completely. Her defense attorney, a seasoned professional who specialized in criminal cases, worked tirelessly to build a case that would highlight the complexities of her situation. He argued that Naomi had acted out of an overwhelming sense of fear and betrayal, driven to protect her son from a perceived threat. He aimed to frame her actions as a tragic response to a deeply flawed situation, rather than a calculated decision to take a life. However, prosecutors were equally relentless, intent on portraying Naomi as a woman who had allowed her emotions to spiral into violence. They emphasized the need for accountability, arguing that no matter the circumstances, taking a life was inexcusable. The courtroom became a battleground, with each side fighting to shape the narrative of what had happened that fateful night. Naomi's family and friends rallied around her, providing emotional support as she faced the harrowing reality of her situation. They painted a picture of a devoted mother and dedicated officer, emphasizing her years of service and her commitment to protecting her community. Yet, the stark truth remained: she had taken a life, and the legal system would not easily forgive her. As the trial commenced, Naomi sat in the defendant's chair, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Each witness called to the stand painted a different picture of the events of that night, some sympathetic to her plight, while others cast doubt on her character. The emotional toll of reliving those moments was excruciating, and with each testimony, Naomi felt the walls of the courtroom closing in around her. The prosecution's case hinged on the argument that Naomi had acted with intent, that her decision to reach for her service weapon was a conscious choice made in a moment of rage. They highlighted the fact that she had been trained to handle firearms and to de-escalate situations, implying that she had failed in her duty to uphold the law, even as she had been a protector. In contrast, the defense sought to illustrate the emotional turmoil that had plagued Naomi in the weeks leading up to the incident. They brought in experts to testify about the psychological impact of betrayal, family dynamics, and the pressures of being both a police officer and a mother. The goal was to humanize her, to show that she was more than just the sum of her actions on that night. As the trial unfolded, Naomi grappled with the enormity of her situation. Each day brought new challenges, and the uncertainty of her future loomed large. The guilt of what she had done weighed heavily on her, and the thought of her son growing up without her filled her with a profound sense of despair. She had acted in a moment of desperation, but now she faced the consequences of that choice in a way she had never imagined. The legal battle was not just about her fate, it was also about her identity. Naomi was a mother, a police officer, and a woman who had found herself at the crossroads of love and violence. The journey through the legal system would force her to confront the darkest parts of herself, to reckon with the choices she had made, and to seek a path toward redemption, however uncertain it might be. The trial had become a crucible, a relentless examination of Naomi Green's life, choices, and the tragic events that had unfolded on that fateful Valentine's Day. Each day in the courtroom felt like an eternity, the tension palpable as both the prosecution and defense presented their cases. The atmosphere was electric, charged with emotions that ran high among the spectators, friends, family, and strangers drawn in by the sensationalism of the story. As the trial progressed, Naomi's world grew increasingly surreal. She sat in the defendant's chair, her hands clasped tightly together, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman who had allowed her emotions to spiral into violence, framing her as a person who had made a conscious choice to take a life, regardless of the circumstances. They asserted that she had been trained to handle firearms and to escalate dangerous situations, thus, her actions were inexcusable. In contrast, the defense sought to portray Naomi as a devoted mother caught in an impossible situation. They brought forth expert witnesses who delved into the psychological impact of betrayal and the complex dynamics of her family life. They argued that Naomi had acted out of fear for her son, driven to a breaking point by the emotional turmoil that had enveloped her for months. The narrative they constructed aimed to humanize her, to make the jury understand that she was not merely a police officer who had pulled the trigger but a mother who felt cornered and desperate to protect her child. As the days turned into weeks, the courtroom drama unfolded with gripping testimonies, emotional outbursts, and moments of profound silence. Naomi listened intently as witnesses recounted the events leading up to the shooting, their words heavy with implications. Each person who took the stand seemed to add another layer to the complex tapestry of her life, weaving in threads of love, betrayal, and ultimately, tragedy. The jury, a group of 12 ordinary citizens thrust into the extraordinary circumstances of Naomi's case, watched closely. They were tasked with the monumental responsibility of determining her fate, a burden that weighed heavily on their shoulders. As the trial drew to a close, both sides delivered their closing arguments, each one a final plea to the jury to see the truth of their respective narratives. The prosecution urged the jury to hold Naomi accountable for her actions, emphasizing that no matter the emotional distress she had experienced, the act of taking a life could not be justified. The defense, on the other hand, implored the jury to consider the context in which Naomi had acted, to see her as a woman who had been pushed to the brink by circumstances beyond her control. Finally, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The jury was sent to deliberate, their decision hanging in the balance. For Naomi, those hours felt like an eternity. She sat in the holding area of the courtroom, her heart racing, her mind a whirlwind of fears and hopes. Would they understand? Would they see the woman who had fought for justice for others, who had only sought to protect her son? As the jury filed back into the courtroom, a hush fell over the spectators. Naomi's breath caught in her throat as she glanced at her attorney, who offered a reassuring nod, though she could see the tension etched on his face. The four-person stood, the weight of their collective decision palpable in the air. In the case of the state versus Naomi Green, we find the defendant, she paused, and time seemed to stretch infinitely. Guilty of second-degree murder. The words hit Naomi like a physical blow. Her heart sank, and a wave of disbelief washed over her. The reality of the verdict crashed down, shattering the fragile hope she had clung to. Guilt filled the room, a heavy fog that enveloped her as the implications of the verdict settled in. She was now a convicted felon, facing the possibility of years behind bars. As the judge called for order in the courtroom, Naomi's mind raced. She thought of Jalen, the son she had fought to protect, and the life that lay ahead of him now without her. The tears streamed down her cheeks, each one a testament to the pain of lost opportunities, shattered dreams, and irrevocable choices. The sentencing phase would come next, and as the judge addressed the court, Naomi felt a mixture of fear and resignation. She had once been a protector, a guardian of her community, and now she was a woman stripped of her identity, facing the consequences of a moment that had spiraled out of control. In that moment, she realized that the path to redemption would be long and fraught with challenges. She would have to confront not only the legal ramifications of her actions but also the emotional turmoil that had led her to this point. As the judge pronounced the sentence, years of incarceration, Naomi felt as if the ground beneath her had crumbled away. The weight of the verdict would follow her into the future, a constant reminder of the choices she had made and the life she had lost. She had entered the courtroom as a mother seeking to protect her son, and now she emerged as a woman forever marked by tragedy and the legal consequences of her desperate act. In the aftermath of her trial and the subsequent verdict, Naomi Green found herself navigating a psychological landscape fraught with turmoil. The walls of her prison cell echoed with the weight of her choices, each moment punctuated by the haunting memories of that fateful night. As she sat alone in her small, stark room, she grappled with the consequences of her actions, a relentless cycle of guilt and despair that threatened to consume her. The initial shock of the verdict had been overwhelming. Naomi had entered the courtroom with a flicker of hope, a belief that the jury might understand her plight, but as the words, "guilty of second-degree murder," reverberated through the air, that hope shattered. She felt a profound sense of loss, not merely for her freedom but for the life she had envisioned for herself and her son, Jalen. The weight of her actions pressed down on her like an anchor, pulling her deeper into an emotional abyss. Isolation became her constant companion. The prison environment, with its cold steel bars and unforgiving routines, intensified her feelings of loneliness. Naomi was surrounded by others who shared similar fates, yet the emotional distance was palpable. Each inmate had her own story, a tapestry of pain and regret, but none of those narratives could truly resonate with Naomi's experience. The solitude of her thoughts became a prison within a prison, a space where her mind replayed the events of that night over and over again. She often found herself reliving the moment she pulled the trigger, the flash of the gun, the sound of the shot echoing in her ears like a relentless drum beat. No matter how hard she tried to push the memories away, they returned with vivid clarity, taunting her with the reality of what she had done. The image of Marcellus collapsing to the floor haunted her dreams, a specter that robbed her of any semblance of peace. Night after night, she was chased by shadows of guilt, unable to escape the truth of her actions. Therapy sessions, mandated by the prison system, offered a glimpse of hope but were often fraught with difficulty. Naomi sat across from her therapist, who patiently encouraged her to explore her emotions. The sessions were a mixed bag. Some days she felt like she was making progress, unraveling the complexities of her trauma, while other days felt like an exercise in futility. Each time she attempted to articulate her feelings, the words caught in her throat, tangled in a web of shame and regret. "Why did you do it?" her therapist would often ask gently, probing for deeper insights. Naomi would grapple with the question, her mind racing back to the tumultuous weeks leading up to the shooting. The signs had been there: Marcellus's secrecy, Jalen's withdrawal, but she had been so desperate to hold on to her family that she had ignored the warning signs. It felt like a betrayal of her own instincts, a failure that only intensified her self-loathing. As the months dragged on, Naomi began to experience the physical manifestations of her psychological distress. Anxiety became a constant shadow, creeping into her thoughts and making even the simplest tasks feel insurmountable. She would find herself staring blankly at the wall, a knot of tension tightening in her chest, unable to breathe through the weight of her guilt. Panic attacks plagued her at unexpected moments, leaving her gasping for air, trapped in a cyclone of fear and remorse. In the quiet moments of reflection, Naomi found herself grappling with her identity. She had always defined herself through her roles as a police officer, a wife, and a mother, but those identities had been stripped away. The badge she had once worn with pride now felt like a symbol of failure. The woman she had been, who fought for justice and protection, was now a convicted murderer. The dissonance between who she had been and who she had become was jarring, an unbearable rift that left her feeling lost and adrift. As the years in prison stretched on, Naomi sought solace in writing. She filled countless journals with her thoughts, pouring out her soul onto the pages in an attempt to make sense of her reality. Writing became a lifeline, a way to process her emotions and confront the darkness that loomed over her. Each entry was a cathartic release, allowing her to articulate the pain that had been trapped within her for so long. Through her writing, she explored themes of forgiveness, both of herself and of those around her. She grappled with the notion that forgiveness was not a destination but a journey, one that required patience and compassion. As she penned her thoughts, she began to contemplate the possibility of redemption. Could she ever forgive herself for what she had done? Could she hope for a future beyond the confines of her prison cell? In the depths of her despair, Naomi also turned her focus toward her son, Jalen. The thought of him growing up without her weighed heavily on her heart. She poured her love and regrets into letters addressed to him, pouring out her feelings and expressing her hopes for his future. Each letter was a way to maintain a connection, a bridge to the life she had once cherished. She wanted him to know that despite her absence, he was always in her thoughts, and she would forever be his biggest supporter. Naomi's psychological journey was one of profound struggle, but amidst the darkness, she began to glimpse the possibility of healing. She learned that confronting her past would not erase it, but it could allow her to reclaim her narrative. The process was painful, littered with setbacks and moments of despair, yet each small victory felt like a step toward understanding herself anew. As she moved through the labyrinth of her emotions, Naomi realized that while she could not change the past, she could choose how to respond to it. The psychological impact of her actions would remain a part of her story, but it would not define her entirely. With each day that passed, she grew more determined to emerge from the shadows of her past and to build a new identity rooted in resilience, compassion, and the hope of reconciling with the love she had for her son. As Naomi Green sat in her prison cell, the weight of her choices settled heavily upon her, a constant reminder of the life she had lost and the irrevocable damage she had caused. The journey from that fateful night to this moment had been fraught with pain, despair, and a relentless search for understanding. Each day spent behind bars was a day filled with reflection, a chance to confront the myriad emotions that swirled within her, each one a testament to the complexities of her humanity. The verdict had marked a pivotal point in her life, transforming her from a protector into a symbol of tragedy. She had entered the criminal justice system as someone who had dedicated her life to serving and safeguarding her community, only to find herself on the other side of the law, grappling with the consequences of her actions. The guilt of taking a life weighed heavily on her conscience, a burden that seemed insurmountable. Yet, amidst the darkness, Naomi began to explore the possibility of redemption, a concept that felt both foreign and essential to her healing process. Through therapy and her writing, she discovered the importance of self-forgiveness. It was a difficult lesson, one that required her to confront the darkest parts of herself, but it also offered a glimmer of hope. She learned that forgiveness was not merely an act of absolution for her past but a way to reclaim her narrative and redefine her identity. It was a gradual process, filled with setbacks and moments of doubt, but with each small victory, she moved closer to understanding that her past did not have to dictate her future. Naomi's thoughts often returned to Jalen, the son she had fought so fiercely to protect. The guilt of her actions haunted her, and she mourned the bond they had once shared. She envisioned him growing up without her guidance, navigating the complexities of life alone. In her letters to him, she poured out her love, expressing not only her regrets but also her hopes for his future. She wanted him to know that he was never far from her thoughts, that even in her absence, she would always be his greatest supporter. The letters became a lifeline, a means of maintaining their connection despite the physical distance that separated them. As the years passed, Naomi began to find solace in the small moments of her days in prison. She forged connections with other inmates, discovering shared stories of struggle and resilience. These relationships served as a reminder that, while her actions had led her to this place, she was not alone in her pain. The bonds formed within those walls allowed her to see the humanity in others, igniting a spark of empathy that had been dulled by her own suffering. Through group therapy sessions, she learned the power of vulnerability and the importance of sharing her story. Each time she spoke of her experiences, a weight lifted from her shoulders. The act of sharing became a source of strength, a reminder that healing was not a solitary journey. It was a process that involved community, connection, and the willingness to confront the truth of one's actions. In the quiet moments of reflection, Naomi began to understand that the path to redemption was not linear. There would be days filled with hope and progress, and there would be days steeped in despair and regret. But through it all, she remained committed to her journey, determined to emerge from the shadows of her past with a renewed sense of purpose. The lessons she learned during her time in prison extended beyond her own struggles. They became a driving force behind her desire to advocate for change, to use her story as a means of raising awareness about the complexities of mental health, the impact of trauma, and the need for compassion within the criminal justice system. Naomi envisioned a future where her experiences could inspire others, where she could contribute to a narrative of healing rather than one of despair. As she looked toward the future, Naomi felt a sense of resolve. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it head-on. She understood that the scars of her past would remain, but they would no longer define her. Instead, they would serve as reminders of her resilience, her capacity for growth, and her unwavering love for her son. In her heart, Naomi carried a vision of reunion with Jalen, a day when she could share her journey with him, explain the choices she made, and express her love in person. She dreamed of rebuilding the trust that had been shattered, of being there for him as he navigated the complexities of life. The hope of that future fueled her determination to continue her journey of healing, both for herself and for her son. In conclusion, Naomi Green's story is one of profound complexity, a journey marked by tragedy, loss, and ultimately, the possibility of redemption. It serves as a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, there exists the potential for growth, understanding, and transformation. While she may never fully escape the consequences of her actions, she can choose to forge a new path, one rooted in empathy, resilience, and a deep commitment to healing. And in doing so, she hopes to honor the love she has for her son, a love that remains undiminished despite the chasm that life has created between them.